There's something on Wally.
You know, I still don't trust the cloud and Zoom and the whole 9 yards, and my state statutes still say I need to record them, so I record them.
So you do it twice. All right. So I'll call the meeting to order at 5:36. This is our Monday, May 9th, 2022, 5:30 p.m. special meeting for the POCD subcommittee. We've got myself and Karen and Adam, which is a quorum. Joining us also is Glenn, and as always, our intrepid leader.
No.
So we've got just a quick approval of minutes to take care of before we jump into the review of the POCD, and I'd look for a motion to approve the special meeting minutes of February 15, 2022.
I make that motion.
I'll second that.
Great. Any discussion? And all those in favor, so signify by raising your hand and or saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. That's a unanimous, so there's no dissension. And then I would, before we get started, I definitely want to get to agenda item 4B, which is scheduling of the next meeting. So let's go as long as we can stand, but don't give me 5 minutes at the end. So when you've got 5 minutes left, then call on call.
Okay.
All right, so then I'm going to turn this over to Glenn, if that's okay with you, and we'll run through the first draft.
Great. So I'll share a screen in a moment in terms of the plan itself. What occurred here to create this draft is that the original working booklets that we had put together and talked through, I had notes over. I edited those booklets to create some plan chapters. And then I added some information in the front and the back. Now, the front information is the conditions and trends and some results from the survey. And information at the back is some information about implementation and consistency with state and regional plans. But I guess the big news here overall is that we learned within the last week or two that the census data, the 2020 census data, which generally is released by the end of the year after. So 2020 data should have been released in 2021. Turns out it's not going to be released until this time next year. So the Census Bureau got messed up and the schedule pushes everything out. So we're going to have to roll, I believe, with the American Community Survey data. It's got margins of error around most of the numbers that we're using, but it paints a picture of kind of where Kent is at. So I just wanted to preface the comments tonight with that news, which is we had been hoping and waiting, if you will, for the new data so that we would integrate that into the plan. And originally we were thinking it was going to be May, then we heard July and August, and then they finally just threw in the towel and said, okay, it's going to be next year. So that's the big picture issue here. Let me just share a screen here.
Is there any reason, or is there any efficacy, or that's the wrong word? Should we plan on updating the plan of conservation and development when the new census data comes out, or can we simply ride with this alternate information for the next decade?
I would suggest that we take a look at the data when it comes out, Matt. It's a year from now. So I know that the State of the Town report, which was from 10 years ago, the last POCD, is on the town website. That provides a lot of information, which is useful. So I think that we can wait until next year, and I'll get a handle on what's happening with the information, and then we can decide what to do. There's two ways to go, I think, at that point in time, one of which is just update the information that is in this POCD so that it's the actual data without margins of error associated with it. Another option would be to create a new State of the Town report, which would then feed into the POCD. And that's a more significant effort. So I think I kind of like data precision, so I'd like to do more in that regard. But I guess I feel we should get the data first and then we'll figure out what our best next step is.
Would it be so unheard of for us to accept the POCD, in the end, when we get to there, accept the POCD with the understanding that when the census data is out, we will update those figures? And
I think that that's a very reasonable approach, Adam. And I think we're stuck with the state 10-year deadline. And the state didn't have that, well, they might have had it 10 years ago. But that's a fairly new requirement that didn't used to exist. So they put us in this situation where we need to get to an update. Yet the data isn't the way we'd like it to be. So do I anticipate anything that's going to fundamentally change the policies in the plan? No, I don't see that happening. But I think it would actually give us a little bit more precision about the changing demographics. We're still going to miss the COVID effect in terms of what happened with migration and age composition. And as we were just talking earlier, some of the houses being built. Part of that is due to economic and other conditions in addition to COVID. But much of that occurred after 2020. So even the census data is not going to catch that. But I think having the best data we can is a good step for us.
I think so too. And I'm just looking, just the last year, we have 2 developments that are, one we accepted, one came to us in the incentive for using the incentive housing zone and recently. And so there's more current data would be better.
Yep, I would agree. So I'll just start to go through the plan. I think I'll talk about the table of contents first. I mean, the cover is just a placeholder at this point in time. Do you think it's okay? Anybody got great pictures?
It looks good to me for now.
Yeah.
You know who you might want to tap into? Brian. He's on Facebook. And he shoots a lot of the Northwest Connecticut towns with his drone. So I'm wondering if he might have, I know he recently just put up 3 or 4 pictures on Facebook of the Kent School.
Yep.
He's done Route 7. He's done the whole valley. He's got tons of drone shots that might be something that we could look at if anybody wants to.
Yeah, why don't you and I work on that, Donna? We'll see what
Okay.
we come up with. And I mean, I thought Kent is such a diverse community. It's got such different parts to it, but I thought that the river and the town center and sort of this misty morning was really kind of an attractive shot. So we'll see what we've got and then go from there. I think the table of contents, again, we've set it up with the 4 main booklets as chapters, sustainability, resiliency. I think we had this called this before conservation, and the committee indicated at that time they much preferred the phraseology of community assets, development, and then infrastructure. We packaged on front of that the introduction and a conclusion, and we end up with a document that's sort of overall about 100 pages. A welcome letter that right now is simply my letter to you, but when the time comes or our next step in the process, we'll shift this letter out and either be a transmittal to the community for public comment or some other type of next step in the process. A quick page that summarizes some of the key elements of using the POCD. The first of which is that action steps are specifically called out so that actions, updating regulations and other things like that will almost jump off the page at you. Policies are listed here, which may guide zoning amendments, 824 reviews, special permits, etc. And also leaders and partners are identified. So this is just to give readers a sense that the plan has a purpose in terms of moving ahead. And then the introduction, just kind of a basic, simple overview on the POCD, what a plan of conservation and development is about. the overall organization around the main themes that we had talked about as part of the discussion booklets. Then we start to get into conditions and trends, and this is the information again, the history of Kent, which I think is pretty fascinating. Most people sort of don't realize the different eras that Kent has been through, the prominence of things like tobacco farming that, in the central Connecticut Valley was a big deal, but in Kent, with the topography and everything else, it was a surprise to me and maybe a surprise to others. So just some basic background information in terms of the conditions and trends overall, historical maps that start to give a sense of the way the community was organized with settlement patterns over time, and the evolution of sort of from Flanders, which was the original center of town with the train station showing up, transitioned to Kent Center. In the meantime, East Kent and South Kent also evolved to become kind of centers of their own. And that really kind of sets the stage for where we're at today. Oops. Just a population overview in terms of the growth and evolution of Kent, population-wise. I'm not sure the population number for 2020 is going to change. Those numbers were released in final form for redistricting for political election purposes. So I think that number is pretty solid. Information on the median age, and I think that's the interesting thing for us to kind of think about here, that since 1970, median age has gone up really significantly overall in Kent. Part of that is just because the desirability of the community, aging baby boomers, housing prices have made it challenging for younger people to move to Kent. So it's something which affects our outlook for the future, and something for us to think about, I think, moving ahead. Some information here in terms of household income, number of jobs in the community, self-employment, again at 23%. So 1 out of every 4 jobs held by Kent residents are self-employed. And that's similar to some of the communities around us. Actually, Cornwall and Sherman and Sharon and Warren are just a little bit higher. But you can see much more than Washington and New Milford. Some basic information on housing, quick update. I've been coordinating with Jocelyn with the work on the housing, affordable housing plan. And I think the way we're anticipating right now is that the work will come together on a timely basis. They're going through their own process in terms of preparation of that plan, and we'll integrate it later when it's ready.
Then before you leave this page, the last paragraph, the second to last line,
Yeah.
subject, you saw that?
I did.
Okay, good.
I missed it, Matt, when it went out, but here we're sitting here today with it up on the screen and your eyes are like drawn to it like a magnet. You say to yourself, how the heck did that happen? So thank you for that.
Yeah, with all the modern spell check and everything.
I know. The funny thing is the word, if it has a number in it, it ignores it unless you unselect that option. So because it was a 4, it skipped it. Go figure. Some basic information. I apologize, I skipped a page there on land use and zoning, just kind of an overview of the configuration of the community overall. And then we launch into community issues and concerns. So I just want to stop here before we get into the survey stuff. Any thoughts, questions, anything else on the information so far? We're up to page 15 already, and I don't want to keep going, give everybody a chance for some comments.
So I was looking at these 2 maps, Glenn, and I wanted to zoom in to get a better understanding because I was looking at it online, and the resolution isn't great. Is there, or can we find a way to make these so they're zoomable, so the PDFs are have a higher resolution?
Yeah, so what I would propose to do here for both of these, Matt, is click links to a higher resolution version. So what it ends up happening here is that these maps get converted to JPEGs to insert into the report and then converted to PDFs. And so as a result, the resolution is static and it really doesn't work well. But if the committee is comfortable, what I propose to do is put a click link on the bottom of the page or on the side that says click here for a higher resolution map. Then that map would be separate from the plan, but just get there through a click link and you could zoom in on neighborhoods and properties. So that's what I would propose. Does that sound okay?
That's fine with me.
And I think the same thing on the zoning map, because the zoning map on the next page is actually, oops, pretty complicated in terms of all of the overlay zones and where the overlay zones overlay other overlay zones. And we also have, as you're perhaps aware, this red area here, which is area which is under FERC jurisdiction. And so First Light has special, I guess I'd call them veto provisions in these areas. They can override local zoning.
Yeah.
In these areas. So fortunately, it's based on the backwater from Bull's Bridge. And so it's a very narrow, it's the river banks going all the way up underneath the bridge and then a little bit further north of that. But I wanted to include this in the plan because I think it's an important thing. I wouldn't expect it to show up very often, but when it does, it could be something significant going on. So just throw that out there. I think
It's
click links
very
will definitely help there.
significant when they get a letter from First Light telling them, we have flood rates on your property. And then people kind of come running into the office and say, what the heck is going on? So it's important to have.
Has there ever been a situation, Donna, where they've mixed something or prevented something from happening?
No, not yet. I know that they were not happy with a couple of the rafts that had been put in. People were putting in their own docks and that kind of thing. And you have to go to them first. And if they say, no, you can't do this, they even override inland wetlands. So,
Yep.
but I've not had anything happen yet. But I think now some of those houses are starting to turn over, and I think you're going to start seeing some things start going through First Light where there'll be issues. So I think it's important to have it now is a good time to put it in.
Yep. Okay, good. Anything else on the condition and trends information then, or the introduction? So the next page gets into community issues or concerns, and this is really now the survey results and summarizing for people sort of our key findings from the survey results. And we indicate that complete summary. This is really kind of a quick overview for the plan document, but the information hopefully will continue to be available on the town website. I think the exercise that we ran here, we asked people how important certain goals were to them, and then how good a job they felt the town was doing addressing these goals, allowed us to sort of sort the data into quadrants, and that appears actually here on the next page. And so these in a printed document, hang on. These pages appear together in a printed document. And so what we have here is a link between the chart, which shows performance versus importance, and the actual information from the survey itself. So these issues up here are important to people, and I think the town is doing a good job addressing this. And these are the things like natural resources, protecting natural resources, preserving open space, cultural assets, maintaining, enhancing the town center. Things are people are generally comfortable with the areas or with the activities that are going on. The next category, the purples, are things which are important to people, but they think the town really isn't doing as good a job on, things that perhaps they could do better. So the concepts of sustainability and resiliency, climate change, carbon footprint, and broadband access fell into that category. Bottom right, and these are broken up based on median importance and median performance. So that's how we end up with 4 boxes, and they're a little unweighted because people think the town's really doing a very good job up in here on important things and not such a good job down here. So that's the main sort of focus. The goals are things which are not as important to people, below average, but the town's been doing a fairly good job of guiding residential development, promoting business and economic development, improving community services, and improving community facilities. And then over here in the pink box is lower performance and lower importance. So these are things that maybe for some people they're important and other people they don't kind of care as much. So it just kind of sets the stage, if you will, for how the plan might move on from here. The responses to what people saw as the greatest challenge or need. We could make one thing happen, what would that be? These numbers indicate the number of responses, and these are coded. I mean, I think we have all that information available for people who want to go search for it and get more information here overall. So that's the first chapter in the plan and an introduction. Kind of, again, what is a plan about? What are the conditions and trends affecting Kent today? And then what do residents think is important? And then that sets the stage for the next section, which is where we get into the concepts of sustainability and resiliency. So anything up to here? So we talked through this booklet before in terms of sustainability and resiliency. So I've added the edits in here. I think that's what this red line text is. These are things that the committee members made comments on in our first draft. So the red line really is for you, that I think when we share this with the community, the red line will disappear because people don't need to see or understand the tweaks that were made, but this is meant to save the committee members some reading time, et cetera here. So again, the concept overall of sustainability, ecological sustainability, social sustainability, environmental sustainability, economic sustainability, all those different aspects of sustainability. And then a reference to the Sustainable CT action list in terms of their policies. Some of these don't really fall into the commission's area of responsibility, but these are things that the town may be working on in the future because towns are seeking certification from Sustainable CT about different levels of program. Ken enrolled in the program in April of last year, and eventually will be seeking bronze, silver, and other designations moving forward. Again, so the way this pages are set up, the strategies are numbered. For example, this is in chapter 2 and it's 2.1, which is enhanced sustainability. Policies in black text are strategies we're expected to continue over time. So it's likely that we're going to continue to work on educating residents about sustainability concepts. We don't ever sort of tick that one off as we did that. That's done. We don't have to do that. That's likely to be continuing and ongoing. The reds tend to be more strategy related. And so, for example, here, number 4, modify the zoning regulations to allow electric vehicle charging stations in the town center to reduce setbacks or zero setbacks. And so when the commission does that, boom, that's checked off the list. And if we were keeping this up to date on a regular basis, we'd either show that as done or take it off the list because we don't have to keep working on it. Anything on sustainability? The next section is enhanced resiliency. And again, this text reflects the feedback from our conversations on the booklet. Again, policies and action steps. And we've identified here in each of these tables, the leaders and the partners. I anticipate that when we get the community feedback, we're going to get people who are going to say, I don't want to be on this list. I don't want to be identified with this strategy. But we're also likely to get groups in town who say, well, hang on a second here. I want to be part of that strategy. And so I think this is where we can get feedback from other groups in town to help us on this journey by, is this a good strategy? And do we have the right parties involved in terms of moving ahead? So that's the chapter on sustainability and resiliency. Good to go?
I wonder if we have had any feedback from the sustainability team. And I know that we're going to give all the stakeholders a chance to look at this. And I think it's going to be after the whole commission takes a look at it, but that's something I want to discuss at the end of the meeting. But I guess have we heard anything from the sustainability team? And Karen, did you see anything in your meeting that needs to be addressed now?
No, I have to tell you, I was really impressed going to that committee meeting. It was really interesting, an eye opener. But one of the things that I was most impressed about is that really we're doing a terrific job. The items that were listed as the top priorities are exactly what we have in the POCD currently right now. The number one thing that came out of it was keeping rural character, emergency management. What does this say? I took notes, so I'm trying to read them now. Create more open space, explore options on the river access, water for recreation, i.e. pool for Kent, stormwater management, that included replacing some of the old culverts and limiting some of the possible new development, preserve natural beauty. We talked about flooding, hiring a grant writer to help administer some of the potential money that we need for these things. And then finally, excuse me for the barking dogs, there was a desire to have the power lines buried. Sorry.
Well, I think, yeah, as you point out, Karen, I think most of those got captured in different parts of the plan. And I think if we can get feedback along the way as to whether or not the wording is correct and everything else, I think particularly finding the right verbs here is kind of important, because if town wants to apply to the state for grants or other things like that, making sure those items are listed and addressed correctly would increase Kent's chances of getting those grants. I think back here at the very beginning of the chapter, tried to describe the different concepts of sustainability. I think that's what you touched on with the group. So back on page 20, most people think of sustainability as sort of climate sustainability. And yes, that's important. But there's also other elements: ecological sustainability, energy sustainability, social and economic sustainability. I think having that overall discussion would be great.
And thanks, Karen. That's great. It's nice to know that it was a worthwhile endeavor, and it's nice to know that that we seem to be thinking about the things that they think are important.
We're completely in sync with what the community thinks are priorities for, sustaining our communities. I was really impressed by it. It was great. It was a good group.
That's great. And then I know that at least I think I know that the hazard mitigation plan was finalized and just adopted, or they voted to adopt it.
Yes, yeah, they did that last week. And that was the hazard mitigation plan that was created by the COG.
Were there any major changes from the draft, Donna?
You know what? No, I can't answer that. I don't know. I know. I don't believe that the Board of Selectmen actually read our section because they felt it was a little bit too long. And so they felt that if the COG had created it, it was a good thing to vote in. So they voted it in.
Yeah, so I went through the hazard mitigation plan when it was in its draft format, and I believe I've incorporated things here. So I think as we're reaching out for additional input, we can check with Northwest Hills COG, and I'll take a look also at the adopted plan and see if there's anything. But I think here on page 25 at the bottom of the page, second paragraph from the bottom, we talk about that hazard mitigation plan.
That's great. That's great. And Donna, is that hazard mitigation plan, is that available for public consumption now? Can we find that on the town website? Do you know?
I've not seen it up on the town website yet, but I can find out.
That would be great, if you'd let us know, if it's available. And I mean, it should be, right? If they voted to approve it, then we should have access to
Yeah.
it. Okay,
It might be in one of the public meeting folders, and that's about as far as it got, so. But I will check with Joyce.
and we'll want a way, just as for just somewhat globally, right? We'll have a way or want a way to point to the documents that we reference in this document to link to them, as we said earlier.
Yeah, I mean, that's gonna be something that's gonna be important, I would think.
Okay,
Yeah, I had forgotten that, but I remember us talking about that earlier. So exactly what the timing of that's going to be. So maybe the thing to do would be to wait till we're closer to actual public hearing on adoption, et cetera, and then go ahead and update and insert all of those links so that as things change in the future, we're not going to either have a dead link or an old link. So I'll
Okay.
work with Donna on that.
I agree with that strategy for sure. Yeah, let's put the links in the final.
So the next major section of the plan, and I think Mark's going to have comments on this section, so he's not here today, but I think whatever, it's a work in progress, and so as we get comments from commission members and others on this, we can incorporate that as we go. So the next major section here, we called it community assets. This is about protecting assets and resources important to the community. I think this has long been a focus in Kent in terms of conservation of natural resources, open space, and as Karen indicated, really covers sustainability and a lot of the other stuff. And Kent's got a history here in terms of working on this. So I think this is an important chapter section in the plan. Again, I'm back on that page just for a moment here. I noticed at the bottom that the numbering's off because it should have restarted at 1 here. I'll fix that. And I think that this text should be moved over a little bit, so I'll fix that. But this is, again, a great location here where we're going to get click links on all that stuff. Town character studies, the Route 7 corridor plan, et cetera, et cetera.
That's great.
So again, we got protect natural resources. We have, so I think maps are very important. I think one of the key differences from this plan, just going to go to a 2-page view here for a second here. So I think the 2-page view for a printed plan, or if people looking at it online, spend some time to get the text opposite the map so people can read what's going on and see what's going on. I think the prior plan had an appendix with the maps in it, so you had to kind of flip back and forth. And I think this is just a more user-friendly way to go. Since the soil types are so integral to the residential zoning in town, I thought this was an important map to include. We got everything color-coded. And again, it's not indicative of what they need to do more detailed analysis as part of any development proposal, but we start to get a sense of what the natural capabilities of the land are in Kent.
Hey, Glenn, just a quick housekeeping. Back on page 3, we say this update of the 2013 POCD, and I really thought that it was 2012, and that jumped out at me. So I think that maybe should that be changed to 2012?
I think the question is, I think it might have been adopted in 2012, but the effective date was 2013. So which?
Yeah.
So which date do you want to go with?
I think we should be consistent either way. And I just went back and I didn't look at the date of the POCD. I just looked at the date of my files.
Yeah.
And I know we approved it you're absolutely right, in November, early December of 12.
Right. And then I think it was like January 10th of 2013, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so bear with me just for a sec here. I have the state OPM list here.
So do you go with state OPM list, or do you know?
Well, here was my point, is that the state is listing Kent as the date of most recent prepared or amended and adopted POCD, and the date they have is January 10, 2013. So that technically, Matt, does make it the 2013 POCD, but if you guys feel it's the 2012, I mean, this is going to be the 2022 plan, so it doesn't necessarily matter, but that's the date I went with.
That's, I think we should be consistent, and either one works. I know that in the final 1128 version, it's entitled the 2012 Plan of Conservation and Development.
Well, can you put both dates in? You know, approved on such and such a date, filed with OPM on the such and such a date?
I'd say
A
we.
little
let's pick
strange
one.
to do that for a plan that's already 10 years old.
Yeah,
When
I
you-
agree with you, but it was like kind of covers with both bases.
The cover of the POCD, the current one, it is titled the 2012 POCD.
Well, that's a good, so that's
You know, it says.
what it says on the cover.
Well-
That's what, most people are not going to get the nuance. So now I'm back with Matt and Adam here, that let's call it the 2012 POCD. And either way, it's going to be replaced by this plan when it's adopted. So let's call it what people know it as. Good catch,
Just-
Matt.
I think either is fine, except that the cover of it says 2012. And that'll be confusing to people because not everybody knows that it was adopted in 2013. I didn't even know.
Right.
Perfect. So back into the assets section of the plan, we got natural resources, and then the next 2 pages relate to water resources. Water resources are again becoming the most important resources. You're all familiar with what's happening out in Western US in terms of droughts, and we're kind of fortunate here in New England that the weather patterns generally give us up to 48 inches of rainfall a year, but it's also subject to change. And so many properties in town rely on the groundwater table and everything else. So this is the section about the importance of water-related resources and their locations within the community here overall. The next page is about natural diversity resources. These are sites which are on the state's natural diversity database. Essential requirement here is there could be a rare endangered species or a unique natural feature. I mean, Kent Falls is on here because there aren't that many waterfalls in Connecticut. In other situations, there are actually habitats for, you know, again, plants or animals. And then, as you've seen before, in terms of the strategies, we've got the policies, and then we've got the action steps about, you know, conservation development regulations and other considerations as part of that. Anything on natural resources? We're headed in the right direction here. Thank you. Next section is about preserving open space. The overall goal is continue efforts to preserve more open space in Kent. I have to say, I think the town has done with many different partners, Land Trust, Wantanog, now renamed, and, you know, the federal government, the state, everybody, in terms of preserving open space. So you've really got a lot to be very proud of here. And so this plan celebrates and recognizes what has happened already, identifies some key desirable open space characteristics that we may want to focus on in the future moving ahead, and different types of tools that can be used to preserve open space. Again, our policies and our action steps, land acquisition fund, trails and links between open spaces. And again, the open spaces are color coded here based on who owns them. But as you can see, it starts to provide opportunities for future interconnections, which would be pretty amazing. Thing on open space. 2 pages here now on farms and farming. There was a time that Kent had many more farms, active farms, than it does today, but farming is still active in the community. So this map shows us a couple of different things. Parcels which are using the PA 490 farm status, and those are the parcels which are outlined in red. And then the color coding is soils of statewide importance or prime farmland, because these are areas which really have characteristics which make them, soil characteristics, which make them great candidates for farming in the future. So if we see some of these soils, but not a red line around them, those properties are fallow or not being farmed at the present time. Those might be opportunities in the future. But again, to try to support farms, farmers, and farming in Kent would be part of this. Now, after we prepared this booklet before, I received some comments that the map was wrong. And somebody who was receiving the PA 490 assessment said, my property is not showing with the red boundary what's going on. So we went back and discovered that the information that we were using was taking the first code listing on a parcel and ignoring the others. So in other words, what that meant, if a property large enough had a house on it and the rest of the property was farm, we were picking up the house and not showing it as farm. So we did a deep dive into the database and found every circumstance or condition where anybody was getting the PA 490 and deleted the duplicates. I think we ended up adding another 65 parcels that hadn't shown up the first time. So based on the assessor's database, we think this is a pretty good map. And it'd be nice if we could get more, but that's where we're at today. The next section of the plan is about preserving and promoting cultural resources. I think Kent, again, is somewhat blessed in this regard, both in terms of the resources that exist here, but the work that town has done over the years to preserve and protect these. So we've identified the different types of resources that exist in town, Iron Furnace, Bulls Bridge, the different historic districts, and we've also mapped them out. Here in Flanders, you'll see there's actually two different types of districts. One is the local historic district, where you need a certificate of appropriateness for activities that occur in that area. That's the red area. And then the blue area is the National Register district, which are properties which contribute to the overall historic feeling of the area. So one is regulatory in nature, and the other of which is just ceremonial, in the sense that people in the blue can put plaques on their houses and do other things like that. People in the red can't enter a window box without getting a certificate of appropriateness. So the only other thing I want to put on this map too is these, got this green and yellow hatched area, which is the Chanticoke Reservation. I can see from what I read in the paper that that's becoming a bigger issue at the present time, but this is where the reservation is. And I'm not sure what will happen, if anything, with regard to the plan on that, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And then these red circles are areas which the state have identified for archaeological sensitivity. And there's two ways that an area could have a red circle around it or near it. Historic archaeologic relic was found there. Arrowheads, evidence of pottery, other things like that. Or there can be circumstances or situations where there's a confluence of sunlight, water availability, flat land, hunting grounds, and things that may mean it's a productive area for archaeological finds. The resources are not located at the center of the circle. All right. So I worked with the state on this to identify the locations, and then we degraded the data by picking a compass direction and a distance that's outside of, that would take you away from wherever the activity was. You can't go there and find, dig for Indian heads or whatever. So these areas are areas just to be aware of, that, if activities or developments are proposed, maybe just kind of take a look, or have the state archaeologist take a look and see if there's any relics there to be considered. Community character, which again, I think is such an important part of Kent. People know Kent for a lot of reasons, but the one thing everybody talks about is what a beautiful community Kent is. So even though character has become sort of a four-letter word in state land use regulation, I do think it's an important concept, which we should at least be aware of and celebrate. Using it for a regulatory perspective or approach is something I would urge caution on, but celebrating the character we have, I think, is okay.
I agree.
This map, which was in the current or the prior plan or prepared by HVA, is what they call their character areas. And they have identified all of these, and they're looking at these. Okay, so the list got screwed up here again, the numbering system on this list. I'll have to fix that. Apologize for that. So this ties back to I think it's the Natural and Cultural Riches Report, right, Donna? Is that where
Yes.
these? Yep.
Mhm.
Yep.
There's a big wall map, I think, at Town Hall too, that in the meeting room that celebrates these areas. The only thing I've added to this list are two things, which I think is important for the town to consider. One of which I call, is supposed to be Area 24, which is the hill up behind Town Hall. Let's call it Cobble Hill. That is the backdrop to the village center. So when we get pictures looking from, let's say, Kent School across the river through the town center, we see the green hill in the background. Well, that's Cobble Hill. And so I think this is a very important aspect to the character of Kent. So I thought it was important to call that out because it kind of fallen between the cracks in other areas. So that's, I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but it's area number 24 right here next to in Town Hall. And then the other one I added was number 25, it's meant to be, which is the dirt roads in town. You drive around and they really add a lot to the character of town in different areas. And I thought mentioning those in the POCD would at least provide an opportunity, should something be proposed in those areas, for the commission to have a conversation about that. You know, whether or not it's something we want to protect or enhance in terms of the overall character. Then we've got information on scenic resources. We've got scenic places, scenic corridors, scenic roads. Tried to identify here on the map some of these different assets in terms of the Housatonic River corridor, the Horizon Belt areas, areas of preserved open space that all tie into the scenic aspects and the scenic nature of town overall. Then we have the PA 490 designations. This is again situations where properties get a lower assessed value, which means they pay less in taxes if the property remains undeveloped. So these undeveloped properties contribute to our character overall, whether they're farm, forest, or what's known as open space. This is the location of those areas in town. And so that gets us really through to the end of the community assets section of the plan. It's meant to I think anyway, be a celebration of everything that Kent does and has done with regard to these areas, and lays out strategies to continue to promote this in the future. We on the right track here? I think the next step in the process is going to be for us to share this with the commission as a whole and then with the community as a whole. And I think, again, I think in my view, I think it sets a really good tone in terms of what we've done and are doing.
Yeah, I think so far so good, Glenn.
Thank you, Matt. The next major section of the plan, section 4, is really about development. And I think there's some key elements here overall. First of which is the importance of the village center in terms of the overall character and ambiance of Kent. So we talk about the fact that we've had studies done in the past, and we're going to be adding web links into these. We've historically had the Route 7 Scenic Corridor Master Plan, the Incentive Housing Zone Study, number of activities which have looked at these, outlined some village center principles and concepts that can help strengthen the village center in the future. And then we've also got 2 maps sort of present the village center concept overall in terms of some of the activities going on around it, the ability to perhaps interconnect trails or other connections from the village center to outlying areas. and then focus in a little bit more on the core area. And I think the key opportunities for the future, the town's doing quite a bit with streetscape improvements, the sidewalks, et cetera, that work that's going to happen. But I also think that the opportunity perhaps for some type of development in the meadow and not forgetting the importance of roadway connections is something to talk about in the future. And those are shown in purple here in terms of how we might allow access in a more free-flowing pattern. I think one of the challenges of the village center today is that essentially it's accessed as a cul-de-sac off of Route 7, either through the northern entrance, which takes you past the IGA, or through Kent Green Boulevard. But there's really few other ways to get there. So people are reluctant to go back to a place that's a cul-de-sac unless, you know, it's their destination. I think if we could find ways to connect, not necessarily with roads, streets, and other things, but some sorts of connections that would create opportunities where it feels like it's part of a village center with things interconnected, could have some advantages down the road. So I think that's an important concept for the committee and for the commission to think about and talk about. And maybe there's too many purple arrows here on the map, but maybe there might be some opportunities for sort of, you know, interconnecting some of these areas. So I just wanted to call that out for your attention here overall.
So before you leave these 2 pages, I'm still a little bit concerned, and it might be, you know, it might be too picky, but I'm a little bit concerned about the inner gateway on the northern end. I think the inner gateways to the southeast and west are right, but I wonder if the congregational church has to be included in that inner gateway. And I know it's sort of nestled within some residential properties, and it's really the only non-residential thing that's out that way. And I know that Karen had said that she thought that you nailed it with regard to the inner gateways as you had them listed the last time we looked at this. But I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, that we're still talking about the inner gateway right there at the northern entrance to the Kent Green.
I
So you
think
think that should go further out, further north? Is that
further
what you mean?
north. Yeah,
That's what I mean. But to where? Is it just to the church property? Is there enough of a difference between just north of Sophie's there?
No,
And-
because I think you've got the church, but you also have the community house there. So I do think that could be considered the inner gateway, because there are a lot of functions that go on there.
I do agree with that also. When I'm just thinking about when I'm coming into town, where I think the beginning of it is, and I think that the town kind of begins over there where the community center is, where the congregational church is. It's even just the way the road, you know, as you come in, as you're driving down the road, you come down that little hill, you pass the field or development, whatever it's going to be, in a couple of houses, and then you kind of come into town and you can see town.
Yeah.
It kind of, I mean, the feeling I get is that's where it starts, right there.
And the sidewalks end at the community, at the church.
Yeah.
so I think, first of all, I think that's a great conversation. I think institutional uses like the church and certainly the community house add a lot to our sense, as Adam says, of when we're entering the village. And that's what I was trying to capture with this. So I had the concept, but not the location. So I would suggest, for example, here, moving the yellow circle up to, what do you think, just north of the church?
I think just north of it, because I don't, that way we're not labeling the church as the beginning of town, but that's the spot.
Yep,
right there at those property lines, I think.
yep. So I'm making a note here.
And it's those yellow asterisks are, you know, they're not precise, right? So it's, you know,
They're
just
not meant
stick
to
it
be
right there.
precise.
And you stick your red line, you know, extend that red circle up just a little bit north,
Yep.
just past that church property, I think.
Yep, I think they're meant to be illustrative of the whole scenario here. And so I think the most important part is for the commission in the future to recognize the concept of an inner and outer gateway. And yeah, they're meant to be illustrative. So I think I'll move that on both of these maps. And this map here, we're probably going to shift down because we're going to want to kind of put that into context. So I'll make that happen.
Great.
And then
Can
last year,
I ask a question? Are you gonna include the land trust property on the southern end of that area?
I think you're talking about the field here, Donna,
No, across the street,
The other side.
on the other side.
on the riverside.
If you're, no, on the non-river side.
Glenn,
So
where
keep going.
your cursor is,
Yeah.
that is actually land owned by the Kent School.
Right.
And the other side of Route 7.
Oh,
from your
I'm sorry. Yeah,
cursor,
yeah, yeah. Okay. I
That's.
was thinking
what
Route 7 was
people-
here. You're right, Adam. Yes. So here's Route 7.
Kent
Yes.
Land Trust property, it's where
Yeah.
the Kent Land Trust lets the town use it for a variety of different events.
Yep.
And,
And the farmer's market's gonna be going in that field now. So,
All right. So maybe it would seem to me, I don't think that that changes the gateway, does it? I mean, it just seems to me that the fields are considered sort of rural, and it's not till here that you start to feel like it's a village. I can outline these and put a label on it that says, I think, is that where they run the Fireman's Carnival?
yeah, when that's where it used to be, yeah.
So what would we call that field? What do you think people would recognize that as?
people recognize that as the Southern Gateway.
That
What would you
whole-
call
that-
it, Adam,
On
if
both
you
sides of the
and I-
road.
It's both sides. It's as you're coming from the south going north, when you hit those fields,
That's the
starting
Southern
at,
Gateway.
there's a house on the right, the Debray house, that's considered the Southern Gateway, and those fields, they're protected, and it's really a great beginning to the town. You hit these farm
Over here
fields, and then
on the
you
page
come
on the
right into
left,
town.
Yeah,
I'm showing the outer gateway here. This is where you kind of come away from the river, you come out of the trees, and
Right.
now in the distance, I called that the outer gateway here.
I think
Mhm.
that's
And then the
correct.
inner gateway was here, was you got past the fields. Is that
Right.
working or not really?
I think so. It works for me. I mean, if I throw my 2 cents in there, because I really feel like I'm getting in. I'm in the outer gateway. I pass the outer gateway. I go past the fields, and then I get to the greenhouse and South Commons, and that's where town starts for me.
I agree with that. I think you
Yep.
hit the greenhouse, and that is the beginning of town.
I'd like to
Yep.
put a label on these fields, though. What label would work here? Land trust fields? Would that work?
KLT fields, yeah, it's certainly that's. I mean, everybody knows that whole area is the Southern Gateway, but I think that I think everybody knows that it's the Kent Land Trust. If you think that they wouldn't mind us labeling them as such in the POCD.
I think I think KLT as an acronym is probably okay here. I think most people will get that. And so we just call these we can call them Kent Land Trust fields. We got enough space to do that, or just call them KLT fields. I think that would both raise their visibility on this map and make people recognize that they're there.
And really, the KLT fields go all the way. They're everything on the east side of Route 7, from where the asterisk is at the outer gateway until you get to the inner gateway. So it's everything, all those open fields on the right. That whole.
All right, so
thing.
why don't I add a label on both maps, right? So on the right hand side, you'll only really see the northern 2 fields, but on the page on the left hand side, you'll see all 3 fields, and people can know that those are all 3 fields.
Karen, you were wanting to say something, right?
No, I would just wanted to, can you guys hear me? I think I unmuted. Okay. When we had this discussion at the last meeting, what I was referring to is, I thought Glenn nailed it with the village center core, meaning to me, those are commercial properties. Those are, the area where that to me seemed more like the village core. But I certainly think now from looking at this, that you're correct. It should be expanded to just past, what would it be? the Congregational Church. Yeah.
Community house. Okay.
So anyways, that's my 2 cents. I was referring basically to where, you know, commerce takes place in the village. So.
Yeah.
Good.
Perfect. On the next page, we got a page here talking about the whole concept about electric vehicle charging stations. There's a lot going on this. This is a very, I was going to call it a fluid time, but yeah, it's a charged environment, maybe we'll call it. And I think the idea here again is the different types of chargers, level 1, level 2, level 3, and the progress that's being made in this regard makes it hard to make a decision as to what we should do. But I do think it's an important consideration for Kent overall. And then again, strategies here about maintaining and enhancing the village center here overall.
Now, one of the things that Jean had said at one of the meetings was that Route 7 has been identified as some kind of, I don't know if it's state or federal corridor for electric chargers. Does that change anything that you have in here, or is that of no consequence?
Oh, I think it's a major consequence for the town. So in other words, funding is more likely to be available, and we have an opportunity to jump on it and get out there with it, perhaps faster than others. So I think that that's good news for Kent overall. I think the challenge is we're still working on different types of charging stations and different types of charging capacities.
Right.
And that decision involves more knowledge than I have about the actual mechanics of the solar, the charging industry these days for EVs. And
Right.
what's the right strategy for a town. I think level 1 chargers don't do much. And you can get a little fill up there, but not much. And so I don't know how many of those we would need to meet the demand, but perhaps if we could do level 2 chargers or a mix of level 1, 2, and 3 or something, that could be kind of critical overall. So the plan supports this. And I think that would help the town move ahead with whatever strategy they came up with.
So then we need to put on our zoning regulations or on our zoning agenda to begin the discussion about the location of electric car chargers.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think, you know, strategy number 10 over here is the task to develop an approach to provide for electric vehicle charging stations in the village center, and then amend the regulations to allow that to happen, exempt them from setback requirements, et cetera. So, I mean, we had talked about this in one of our earlier meetings. Do we group them all in one place, in a central place, or
Right,
do we
right.
actually spread them out in the different components? That's a tough issue to kind of come to grips with. And maybe it's a combination. Maybe it's like, you know, a little charging area in each of the 4 quadrants, plus, you know, a more significant one back here by, you know, town hall, because there's space. I don't know.
Right. Okay. All right. Well,
So-
we're gonna have to put that on our agenda, maybe for next month.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Donna, go ahead.
My concern is Litchfield, there was something in the newspaper not too long ago where somebody had gotten permission to put in a charger, and they had no idea that it was going to be 7 feet tall, and it was going to contain advertising on the top of it that could be switched and rotated. And I mean, it was like a whole different, it wasn't just your normal charger, it was an advertising space, basically. And I just don't want to see that happen in Kent. So I think we need to, I think that's something that is going to need to be worked on starting next month.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Donna. I think there are companies out there right now that are trying to jump the gun here and increase their economic return by doing both. And it's not unlike going to a gas station and, you know, your car pulls up and it starts playing, you know, sound commercials for you.
Right.
or the ones with the little screen on them. There's a movie about, you know, the wonders of Wrigley's spearmint gum or something. So I think that those are important considerations for Kent. It would be unfortunate if we were to try to celebrate the advent of electric vehicles and then be surrounded by advertising, both visual, sound, and otherwise. So finding that right mix, I think is important.
And, you know, I think that, I think that this page belongs in the POCD, but anecdotally, the level 1 charger, it doesn't really belong anywhere. You know, when I first bought my electric vehicle, I bought it, had a full charge, and, you know, I drove it back and forth to work a couple of times, and I did the math, and I figured I could go, you know, I could get it down to 60% by going, you know, 3 days back and forth to work. And at the end of the 3rd day, I plugged it into my 110 charger, and it told me that I had, you know, 5 days and 17 hours to get to a full charge. So, you know, you're really not getting any kind of a charge with the level 1 unless you've got, you know, days and days. So
Right.
it's
Yeah.
at least a level 2 and possibly a level 3. And people are willing to pay for the charge to go and sit for an hour, get a full charge, and then go on their merry way.
And I think the only reason I think that level 1 in here is to exactly have that conversation, Matt, is that realistically, you know, a level 1 charger is not going to do much. And here in the sidebar, we have this little sort of equivalent matrix, which says, you know, 1 level 3 charger is the same as 4 level 2s and 16 level 1s. And that's part because, you know, it's a drop in the bucket, kind of, so to speak. So I think for a public environment where we're trying to achieve the benefits, particularly if the state is picking the Route 7 corridor as a primary spine for this,
Yeah.
and yeah, screw the level 1s and let's go to level 2 and 3, because that's where we're going to be higher up on the overall food chain, and that's going to be good for Kent, particularly if
And-
somebody else is paying for it.
Glenn, have you
also-
heard about the Route 7 corridor being a primary focus? Because I didn't get that sense when I listened to the when I listened to the state people talk about where they wanted the chargers to go.
But I'm out of touch on this. I have heard the conversation about the interstate highways and those corridors, but I knew that they were thinking beyond the interstates. And it seems logical to me that Route 7 on the western side of the state is a major north-south road. No, it's not a divided highway, but there's quite a bit of traffic, quite a bit of activity. So I can see where the state says, if we don't put something here, we don't have anything between, let's say, the Taconic Parkway and I-84 or Route 8. That doesn't make any sense. We need to, people are going to be traveling in this area. We need to have something. So I think that Kent can play that to its advantage. So I had not heard of an announcement or a pronouncement about that, but it makes sense to me.
Adam, you started to say something before I.
I was just saying, I also think it is a destination thing. People go out of their way to find a faster charger. And we want that. We want people to come in, get out of their car for a half an hour. It turns into longer, go get something to eat, go into a store, spend their money, go back in their car and
Yep.
go on. And level 3 chargers, they bring them in.
You be careful, Adam. We're going to make you VP of marketing if you keep this up.
I just was looking at all this with my brother, who is an electric car. And so he was talking about going somewhere further than his thing. And he was showing me how it shows you where all the different
Yep.
charging places were. And we had gotten to the discussion of how long it takes for the different charging locations.
good.
Et cetera. So
Okay.
Okay. Anything else on town center, village center? I'm pretty excited about this section of the plan because I do think what you guys have there is so special. I'd like to see it both protected and strengthened as time goes on. I think the plan kind of moves in that direction. Next section of the plan is about business and economic development. Kent is challenged a little bit because we really don't have major business areas. So we have to try to make the most effective use we can of the areas that we have. And we really have the town center area, and then there's the little business hamlet area down in the Bulls Bridge area. So the plan talks about the importance of tourism and visitation, supporting economic development, possibly having a liaison with the chambers so that the work efforts can be shared, supporting home-based businesses, recognizing the contribution of the private schools, both in terms of workers who earn money and participate in the local economy, supporting regional economic development efforts, and a comment here about continuing to avoid strip development along Route 7 as being an important aspect as well. Two discussions, you may recall the conversation we had about the Maple Street area in terms of the industrial zoning, perhaps revisiting that to make sure we've got the best rules in place for what we would like to have happen there, because that's really the only industrial area we've got. Is it doing what we would want it to do? And then the strategy about the Bulls Bridge area in terms of the configuration of the zoning district, the boundaries, the setbacks, et cetera. And the commission may decide to leave the boundaries where we think they are, or possibly to make some modifications in here. I think Donna said she had an application. I think it was this parcel. Yeah. I think may or may not be in the business zone. We're not absolutely sure, but I think having some clarity so that people know what they can or cannot do,
Right.
I think would be an important next step here overall, and to contribute to business and economic development in the town. I think in terms of residential development, I think the discussion here overall is in most parts of town. 31,671 acres in Kent. We rely on the R1 zoning, soil-based zoning. It seems to be working well. The key issue, I think, in town overall, as in many parts of the state, is the issue about housing diversity and affordable housing. The committee is working on that with Jocelyn. And so these pages have some spaces in them. And basically what the space is intended to do is to leave room for incorporating those recommendations and strategies when they're put together. So I think that covers the development issues. Any other thoughts? Talking to Jocelyn, she felt that July or August might be the time that they would have completed their work. And so wherever we were in our process, we thought that that would work well, because either if we're headed for public hearing, we can bring that in at the public hearing. And if the public hearing is later, that once we receive it, we can figure out how to integrate it before we go to public hearing. So I thought that that timeframe and process could work. Section 5 of the plan is about infrastructure here. Infrastructure includes oh, they got a font thing going on here. Communities, facilities and services, a map showing the location of the facilities in and near the center of town here. And then kind of a generalized assessment of the current situations and which ones may require the most attention going forward. The maroon color are areas which appear to have the more significant or near-term needs. So that, for example, includes the library. And then the blue areas are some areas where some attention may be involved. From the survey, Parks and Recreation got a fair number of mentions in terms of recreational facilities. And I know that there's a new director who's working on that master plan, which they've been talking about for quite some time. So that's a kind of an overview in terms of community services and facilities.
You might want to change that. I'm thinking that blue and Park and Rec to red. What do you guys think?
I think that there's some turmoil in Park and Rec at the moment.
Okay.
I don't know whether that turmoil will be long-lived. But I think it's an important consideration for certain. So whether we change it to red now or we leave it blue and then at the last minute change it to red.
What I'd like to suggest, Matt, is
Yeah.
that I think I have the ability to go ahead and split it, make it a blue-red.
That's like giving somebody a 9.5, isn't it?
All right.
I'm just,
I'm
you
gonna
know, just,
3/4, 1/4, my final offer.
you know, I don't know. After hearing what I've heard, after seeing the facility, after listening to the professionals who went and looked at the facility, I'm thinking it should be red.
Well, it got strong support in the survey. The
Right.
inventory work that you've just described had not been done yet.
Right.
So this booklet was prepared last fall for discussion purposes. I think we actually talked about it in January or so. So with the new director and now if they've kickstarted the process, there could be updated information. We want to leave it here and see what happens at public meeting and feedback, go to a split, or just go red. What's the commission's pleasure on this?
You know what? I think leave it blue and then let's see what happens in the public hearing.
Yeah, and I think I would recommend for your consideration that we do a public informational meeting before the public hearing. So in other words, if Park and Rec or others show up and say, I don't know who prepared this, but that blue color just isn't right, then we can talk about it, change it to red, and then we move ahead to public hearing. In other words, it's not showing up as a criticism at the last minute, it's showing up as kind of an eye opener based on new information. So I'm okay with that. Everybody else okay with that?
Yeah,
Karen,
and
you started to say something, yeah?
Just that on the meeting that I attended, the recreational facilities in our town did come up as a top priority. So maybe that should be red.
I was going to go along with Donna's initial recommendation to change it to red, but either way, as long as we've had this discussion and we know that it's somewhat in flux, then let's leave it as blue with the understanding that we may have to change it to red depending on the public comment and what the other commissioners think.
Do you want me to put any sort of note or anything else here? If the next audience for this, Matt, is going to be the commission, we could put a red or yellow box right here on this page and say, committee unsure whether to mark this as blue or red. Ask for the commission for their thoughts. Or just make a recommendation. What's your pleasure?
I think that's a good thought, Glenn.
Glenn,
That way we're sort of kicking the can down the road for 2 weeks.
we're going to bring this to the commission first, and then are we going to then issue it to the public for them to see, or are we going to give it to our partners, the other commissions and organizations that we asked to weigh in on it? Are we going to give it to them before we give it to the general public?
I think that's the conversation that I wanted to have at the end, Adam. With
I know
regard
it
to-
is, but there's been a couple of times or a few times while we were talking and we're reviewing everything, it's kind of come up. So that's why and we don't have to have that discussion now, Matt. We keep coming back to when these partners and these other organizations are going to weigh in. I'm just, because Park and Rec is a perfect example of when are they going to weigh in on this.
Absolutely. So I would lobby. Let's get through the next
20 pages.
4 pages, and then have that discussion if that's all right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think the yellow box for discussion on the 25th would be a good thing, and then go from there.
Yeah.
Just so that it doesn't get lost with,
I would agree.
10 people looking at it.
Yep. Okay. And then just strategies and action steps here. And I think with regard to Park and Rec, the highlight here is to complete the Park and Rec master plan would let us know what the next steps are. So if they've made progress in that regard, that would be great. Next section of the plan has to do with roadway circulation. I mean, I think the basic configuration of the roadway system in Kent is fixed. I don't see that there's too many other major road connections that are going to be built in town or would need to be built in town. We have perhaps the road connections that we're going to need for the future development of the community. We're going to just need to maintain those, et cetera, overall. There were some problem areas identified as part of the regional transportation plan, one of which is 341, just the curve coming down. Particularly, there's accident incidents there because of weather and driving conditions or people being surprised by the roadways. And then there's also a notation about the monument in the center of town, which has, befuddled people for, quite some time in terms of what they're supposed to do with it. And then also the section of Route 7 north of the village center, sort of through Flanders, where I think the roadway width, the topography and other stuff has created some accident incidents there as well. There's nothing in this plan that suggests that those need to be fixed or changed, but just brought for everybody's attention, and also all of the scenic roads. An overall observation about the importance of pavement management. It's much cheaper to maintain the road as we go rather than wait for it to fail and then go ahead and rebuild it. And also talks a little bit about unpaved roads. Section on pedestrian, bicycle, and transit. I think clearly the only place in Kent that we see public sidewalks happening is going to be in the village center area, and the town's undertaking the streetscape project, so that's going to move ahead. And if people, the private schools decide to do sidewalks, on their properties, et cetera, that's good for them. Bicycle circulation, I think, is an opportunity for Kent, both on existing roadways. The state recognizes in their bicycle suitability map that there are portions of Route 341 and Route 7 which are well configured for bicycle travel in their view. And there's some other areas which are much more challenging due to the speed of traffic and the width of the roadway. But there are areas that could be worked on, et cetera, in the future. Then we move on to utility infrastructure here. I think the biggest conversation in here is the water supply. There's ample supply for the community needs in the future based on situation that exists today. The sewage treatment facility is a delicate scenario. Kent has really the only situation in the state of Connecticut where ground discharge is permitted. So it's the type of thing that will be allowed to continue. But there's perhaps some threshold that at some point in time in the future, there's going to need to be an upgrade related to that overall. So there's plenty of capacity there. The flow is at about 75,000 gallons a day today. And the capacity is up to 142,000 gallons a day. So Matty, Adam, you getting a beard there? Is that what's going on? So I think it's an issue here on the sewage treatment plant where
Cats are the only animals that we let do that to us.
I know.
The dog barks, you holler at the dog, you put yourself on mute, you just, with cats.
Adam looked like he had a full head
Because
of
they
hair.
don't care.
there you go.
Anyway. Sorry.
So I think it's a blessing for Kent in the sense that we are able to support our village center and some of the uses and have the density and activities that we do because we have a sewage plant available. However, its configuration relative to current regulatory standards, depending on what happens in the future, may require some significant additional investment. So that becomes kind of a double-edged sword here overall. Under state law, we're required to identify areas which are possible future sewer expansion areas. And I worked with Bart Clark and the WPCA, the Sewer Commission, in terms of the configurations of these areas. And the rest of town is identified as planned sewer avoidance areas, because that's what our intention is for the future. Electricity, again, mentioned here that there are recommendations about putting the utility lines in the center underground, but it's so I was going to say prohibitive. It's expensive. It makes it a challenge. And so that's going to have to be something I think that we work on over time. Wired communications, both in terms of broadband internet, is something which I think is important for all communities. Kent could benefit from this. And then also wireless infrastructure, pointing out the map that we got from the state that shows where the gaps are in terms of wireless coverage. We do have a significant gap along Route 7, and there may be some interest in the future about ways to address or fill that, or on some of the other outlying areas. But it would seem to me this central part of Kent, perhaps susceptible to a future application to the Siting Council, perhaps, to address these. Unless we decide we want to try to take a proactive step. So I put a sidebar in here that shows some stealth installations that a flagpole. I think the coniferous trees look kind of strange. But are there ways, either with barn silos or other things, that we could try to find ways to address people's desire or need for wireless communications, but maintain the character of town?
For what it matters, and I don't know if there's any way for us to add to the POCD here. I've always thought that it would be strategic for the town. I don't know if that becomes a planning and zoning commission thing, to basically to hire a company to look at the areas that don't have coverage and where the best possible locations for cell towers could be. I think if the town targets areas, it makes it easier to keep cell towers out of areas where they aren't going to be so great.
I think that's why I put the box in here, Adam, is about being proactive. Our goal is to promote better wireless coverage and to work with providers or a private engineer to identify possible locations. These can be money makers for the town in a significant way. So if there were areas sort of north of Flanders or even on the other side of the river that would help address the need for communication in a slender pole like this monopole flagpole painted green, so you really almost didn't see it, could be a way to address the communication need, to make money for the town. It could be a distinct possibility. So rather than lay out the specifics, I think the idea was here to point out this language about being proactive. And on the next page, right now, it says town is being the responsible entity. And that's really because we don't have a clear area to point to say, well, this should be the blank that should do this. But I think that this could be a high priority. And now that brings us into the conclusion section of the plan. There's only a couple of required statutory elements in here. The first of which is to make a finding of consistency or inconsistency with the state and regional plan. At the time of writing of this plan, the state had not adopted an update to the 2013 to 2018 plan. I understand that they have since done that. So I am going to check on that. I don't think the map has changed. But their thoughts or ideas about Kent's overall pattern of development and what's recommended in this plan are generally consistent. So I think we're okay in that regard. We're required to make a finding of consistency with state growth principles. And I think our plan is consistent with those principles all the way down the line. So that's a positive finding there as well. In terms of implementation, I think this is kind of a key part of the plan overall. policies don't really lend themselves to implementation because they're general statements of direction, and they're always going to be our general statements of direction. That's who we're and what we are as a community. But I think, again, the action steps, which are the red italic text, really start to lay out ways that the plan can be implemented proactively. The policies tend to be reactive in the sense that something is being proposed and the commission compares what's being proposed with the POCD for consistency. And if the opportunity arises, I think there's ways to use the capital budget and the annual operating budget to reflect plan priorities. And that's something that we can advocate for. And then there are some action steps on implementation. Basically sort of promotes a proactive process to implement the POCD, particularly for the strategies, et cetera, overall. So that is the overview of the draft in its current form. And I think, Matt, I'll turn it back to you for discussion about next steps.
That's great. Thanks, Glenn. I have one quick comment about the action steps for the utility infrastructure on page 96. And there's just it's my understanding of our regulations that that the tower, which we've got pretty strict rules with regards to where those towers can be located. Maybe not where they can be located, but the parameters within which those towers can be located on a specific property. So I think that would be important for us to have as an action item to review our zoning regulations to ensure compliance with the POCD. And I think that's somewhat of a general statement, but very specifically to this to the towers, whether we have to say that or not. It would be nice for me to know that we have to do that.
The challenge that I have, Matt, is that at one point in time, I had the opportunity to sit down with a member of the siting council, and we were talking about this. And what they were saying is, to the municipality I was working with at the time, is we don't care what your stinking regulations are, because the siting council is an independent permitting authority that will ignore your local regulations. Because when you try to tell them that's like, well, our regulations say that, they say, we don't care. These are our regulations. But what they have said is the most effective way to approach this with them is what this person called telecommunications principles. And so when you suggest to the siting council that they can help you achieve your objectives and their objectives, they will work with you. So it's a delicate kind of situation, but I think that I have worked with some communities, and there would perhaps be a page here in this section of the plan, which would be telecommunications principles. If it's visible from a historic area or historic district, we'd prefer that it not be located there. We'd always prefer that stealth technologies be used, or we'd always desire that it be painted or camouflaged to disappear into the background. That might be a very effective thing to do in the POCD. Because there's two types of towers. One type is what we really sort of know as a cell tower, and that's where the siting council has exclusive jurisdiction. And then the other type is what's called a municipal tower, and this is a situation that is subject to local regulation because it fits into one of the following two boxes. Number one is that it's a tower on town-owned property. So it's your tower, and as Adam said earlier, because it's your tower, you can do what the heck you want with it. And the town can regulate that. The other situation is that if it's put inside a church steeple or a barn silo, it's not an independent tower, it's attached to or hidden within something else, then the town regulates that as well. So this could be an area which we could provide more information to provide guidance to the siting council on this, or we could call it out to be done, because that might, as Adam sort of indicated earlier, it might require some more work or some more thought as to how that works. How would you like to proceed?
I like the idea of the telecommunications principles. with a few bullet points within the POCD.
All right, so let me take something else which I've done before, which I believe the Siting Council has seen, and adapt it to Kent. And we all recognize this is draft. And what we're looking to do is get comments and feedback, but there are very sensitive and sensible approaches or guidance, if you will, for the types of things we would like to encourage with regard to citing of telecommunications principles.
Does everybody somewhat agree with that direction?
I do.
I do. I think the more we have in our POCD and the more we have in our regulations regarding cell towers, and I do know that the Siting Council really doesn't have to pay attention at all, but I guess, and maybe my understanding is wrong, but my understanding was that the more we had in our regulations and in our POC, and the more targeted areas that we can show are better areas for cell towers, gives us more sway with the Siting Council when a cell tower is proposed that really isn't going to do what they say it's going to do, what the person proposing it says it's going to do.
And I think having some telecommunications principles advances the conversation quite a bit. Because rather than somebody being surprised when these principles show up later, the fact that they're presented in the POCD means people are going to see them up front. So they're going to go in knowing what our goals and intentions are. And I think that might help advance the conversation.
Okay, great, thanks. So I will take Glenn's lead in now after that brief interlude to talk about the next meeting. And we via email had discussed having a special meeting with the full commission on the 25th of May, which is a couple of weeks from tomorrow, right?
2 weeks from Thursday, I think, isn't it?
Okay. And I think Donna has warned, or at least let everybody know, or we let everybody know at the last meeting that we were going to do that, and we got some tacit approval. So I think we follow along with that plan. And to answer Adam's question, I think that we, this draft is in the Plan of Conservation and Development special meeting folder, which is within the Google Drive, the Google Docs for P&Z. So it's really a public document now. But I would hope to bring this to the full commission, have a discussion much like we had tonight. I think, Donna, if we could let everybody know that this document is, the balance of the commission know that it's there, and ask them to please take some time to review it before the meeting on the 25th. We get at that meeting on the 25th of the full commission some kind of sense that, yes, this is the direction we want to go. Yes, this contains almost everything that we want in there. Maybe make some tweaks during that meeting. And at that point, even though it's out for public consumption right now, at that point, we invite the public and our stakeholders to spend the next X number of weeks reviewing it, with the anticipation of having a public meeting sometime after that. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
If the stakeholders, if the sustainability team want to take a look at it now, I don't know how closely they're paying attention to our meetings, but they're all recorded, and if they start looking at it now, they can be more prepared. I would suggest that maybe if they come to the special meeting of the full commission, that we invite them to listen in, but maybe not take any public comment at that meeting, and then, like I said, ask them to take a look at it. And we set another meeting, a public meeting at our 25th meeting.
Well, my thought, I think what I would propose to do is I think I can have this done by the end of this week. is to make the changes we've talked about here tonight and get it to Donna. So that version, people would have a week and a half. It turns out the 25th is a Wednesday. I misspoke. I said it was Thursday. That would give the commission members a week and a half to be able to look at the document reflecting our comments here tonight. And then, so I think they can certainly take a look at where we're at even with this, because it's not going to change in a wholesale way, but I'll have it within a couple of days for sharing with them. I think from the 25th, we should start to map out possible dates. Summer is showing up. And so July and August, in terms of, do we want to try to get our community meeting in before then, or it's not a big issue in Kent and we should feel free to meet in the summertime? Adam had asked the question earlier, how might we approach this? Whether we do stakeholders first and then the community at large, I think was Adam's question. I'm a big fan of doing these informational meetings before we schedule it for public hearing, because we're going to demonstrate to people we've heard what they've said, we've considered it, and we may or may not include it in the plan, but we appreciate their input. So I'm a big fan of doing that, whether it's one meeting for quote stakeholders and residents, that could work, or whether it's two separate meetings. I think in the big picture, I tend to favor getting everybody into the same room at the same time so that people are able to hear what everybody has to say and they know what the commission is grappling with. If we split up the meeting, sometimes people weren't at the first meeting, so they don't know that the commission has other information to work with. So that they're surprised, well, you didn't listen to me. And it's just, well, yeah, but somebody else had a better idea. You just hadn't heard it. So my thought might be to have a date in the back of our minds, whether it's towards the end of June or beginning of July, depending on what's going on. And that assumes that we get through the plan with the commission on May 25th. But at least start to have a thought like, guys, we're not going to do this in July and August, or we can do it in July but not August, or we can do it in August but not July, or to start thinking ahead. So I can work with Donna on that too.
I think having them together, public and stakeholders, is the best thing to do, mostly because all the information that I've ever sent out to the stakeholders, I never got any response. So for me, it's like, why would we give the stakeholders the privilege of having their own meeting when they never responded to begin with? So for me, I think having them together would be the best option.
Yeah, and I think that the stakeholders, I know that we asked them all to respond, but I think that they, in listening to all of them, or at least some of the meetings, most of them concluded that they would rather not, they would rather react to what we were doing than try to guide what we were doing, because they weren't going to be able to think of everything. So, whether that's right or not, it was a conscious decision on some of their parts to sort of wait until the process got going.
I think it's easier for them to do it like that also. I think,
sure,
why start building in stuff that the planning and zoning commission may build into it already.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But the long and the short of it, I think, is that let's have one meeting, and it's not a public meeting, but it's a public informational meeting, right? And let's invite the stakeholders. Let's then make sure that all of those stakeholders get an invitation, at least a notification that the meeting is going to happen, and then we invite them and the public, and we go through same thing we did tonight. It's going to have to be a little bit more detailed. But we're going to go through this. We're going to have another meeting in 2 weeks with the full commission, and we're going to go through this process, and then we're going to go through this process again at the public informational meeting, and then we're going to come back as a subcommittee and decide how we want to address the different comments, and we'll go from there. Okay. I like Glenn's idea of doing it in June. I like to keep the some momentum, right? So today's the 9th. We're going to meet on the 25th with the full commission. We've got a planning and zoning meeting on the 9th of June. I know that, so sometime that third week in June, the third full week in June makes sense to me, but it's occurring to me that, oh no, I'm in that week, it looks like. I guess it's the week after that I'm out.
Well, it seems to me that whoever the stakeholders are, or if it's a board or commission, if they get a limited amount of time to sort of review the plan and come to a consensus within the committee, then they're not really going to be able to provide meaningful committee or commission feedback. So the question is, how much time do we do, and are we looking for individual feedback or commission consensus? Is the Conservation Commission going to want to weigh in? I'm sure that they are.
Yes, they
But-
are.
Do they have an opportunity to prepare? So I think at this point in time, I don't know if we kick it into early July, but the issue would be from the meeting on the 25th, if we're able to get done in one night, I can have the plan turned around, within a week. And then if we say, look, there's 4 to 6 weeks to prepare, that might be better, Matt, than 3 weeks to prepare or get your comments together. So it's your, I'll follow your lead, however you guys want to proceed. And the only wild card I'm thinking of in the back of my mind is we're familiar with the plan because we worked through the booklets and now we've seen the draft, and even the next draft is going to be easier still. But the other commission members really are going to pick up with a 100-page document, and how much time do they need? Are we going to get done in one meeting, or might it take 2?
So I have 2 questions in trying to pick June or July. One is, are we going to do this as an in-person meeting or a Zoom meeting? Shaking your head as in.
Yeah,
I
Matt
think
said,
it has to be a
Which
Zoom.
way?
I think that based on the new law and our inability to have a really good hybrid solution, it has to be Zoom.
Okay, so then it doesn't matter to me whether we do it in June or July. I think sooner is better, as Matt said. But my concern was that, when you start hitting July, there's so many different people going off on vacations. And but when it's Zoom, let us screw up your vacation. Everybody does.
so Matt, are you saying you're not around on June 30? Is that the week you're gone?
No, I am around on June 30, and that's the conclusion that I was somewhat reaching, because there are 5 weeks in June, or at least there's 5 Thursdays in June. And so the 23rd would have been my logical choice, but the 30th still gives us the 30th for a special meeting to ask the whole commission, the full commission, to come and join us. It still gives us 2 weeks until our next regular meeting. So the 30th works for me. That seems to be a 4 week instead of a 3 week, or a 5 week instead of a 4 week from the 25th.
I'd like to advocate for that if I can, for the following reasons. First of all, it is sort of the last day of the month, and so it's are there 5 weeks in June? 1, 2, 3. It's the 5th week of the month. There are very few commissions that are going to meet in the 5th week. So as a result, the date is likely to be open. If we get through with the commission on the 25th, the whole document, I can have it ready shortly thereafter, and that gives a full 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks to review the plan. And if the commission needs a quick follow-up meeting just to finish the last couple of chapters or sections, that still gives us maybe 3 to 4 weeks. I can have most of the changes done and just be ready for the last group of changes. So I think it could give us a date with some options in the middle that we can work around. So Donna, what's your thought on the 30th? Do you think that's a possibility?
June 30th?
Yep.
Sure. I don't know what I'm doing next week, but just pick a date and I'll be there.
June 30th.
It's good for me. That's most important.
I mean, high school graduations are all over and
Yep.
Yeah.
Somebody graduates on Thursday.
I did.
You remember
did.
that? Donna? Wow.
I remember, and it's a long, long time ago, but I remember graduating on a Thursday night. Absolutely.
Oh. You must have
All
been
right.
from Westchester.
It's a Westchester thing. Absolutely is a Westchester thing. So
All
we're
right.
gonna go with a meeting on the regular meeting that we have scheduled already on the 25th with the commission.
Yes.
Mhm.
And then Glenn will make any changes that are recommended during that period of time.
And then,
And-
yes,
And then the next meeting will be June 30th, during which period of time the stakeholders will be and the general public would be invited to review the final draft and come to comment on the 30th.
That's
I
right.
think, I feel I can make the revisions in a short period of time to keep us on schedule and give both the full commission for their meeting and for the community as a whole for their meeting ample time to review the document. So I think as we get down then to the end of June, we've been through with the commission, we've been through with the community, and the table is set for what all other final changes we may want to make to the plan. So I think I can make that happen.
And this is just going to be a public informational meeting. This is not something that I'm going to have to warn and put in the newspaper because this is still a review of the draft. This is not the
is.
finalized version.
I might work with you, Donna, just like we did some PR for the survey, for example.
Yeah.
I might put some materials together that we could share just to say to people, hey, if you want to, we got a meeting on June 30th, formal invitations to conservation and others, but just general notice for the community members who want to show up. I think that would work well.
Okay.
Perfect.
Um,
Excellent.
So Adam and Karen, your thumbs up on that plan?
Absolutely.
yeah.
I think it makes good sense. I think it's perfect. I don't think we want to go into July with it. Like Adam says, people disappear and let's keep our momentum going. So I think that's a good plan.
Okay.
And what time do you want to do this? 7?
I think, well, I just plugged in my calendar 6, 5:30, as I said, is a little bit early, but 6, I think is, we're going to be at it we're going to be at that meeting for 3 hours, right?
I think you're right, though. And, 6 or 6:30 is better. 7 starts getting late.
Okay, so I'll put it down for 6:30 at 6 via Zoom.
6:30 at 6. Got it. And I just have a procedural question, Donna. When we meet on the 25th, it's a full commission meeting and Wes will chair, right? So I go back to being an alternate.
No, oh no, this is a joint meeting with the plan. This is the zoning commission meeting with the Plan of Conservation and Development Subcommittee, and the Plan of Conservation and Subcommittee are going to be running that meeting. I did file 2 agendas after talking to Darlene. So there's an agenda for the Planning and Zoning Commission, and then there's a joint meeting with the POCD subcommittee. But the leader of this meeting will be you as the POCD
And
subcommittee
then
chair.
is that the same? Is that the same then for the public informational meeting?
Yes.
Is this a POCD subcommittee meeting, and this group will be presenting, and therefore I am chair?
Yeah, I would say yes to that because we don't have a finalized version. I think once we have the finalized version, then the plan of the subcommittee, the POCD subcommittee, will formally present that to the Planning and Zoning Commission, And then the subcommittee will be disbanded, and then we have to do our regulatory stuff after that.
Fine. So then for both of those meetings, let's you and Wes and I get together just briefly beforehand, so we're not, so we sort of understand the order of operations, so we're not
Sure.
sort of fumbling around.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So does anybody have anything else that they would like to add or comment upon before we move to the next item on the agenda?
Did that.
Then, well, the last item, the next item is the adjournment, right? So
Yes.
I do have one thing I wanted to say, Matt, which is the last time I saw you, I think you were lying on your back. So this is a major step forward. So it's nice to see you upright. There you go. Good for you.
Thank you, Glenn. It's
You're welcome.
it's liberating to be on my
Recommend.
feet. Thank you. So I would look for a motion to adjourn.
Motion made.
Great. All right. Thanks, everybody. We're adjourning at 7:32.
Thank
Wonderful.
you,
See you in
Glenn.
a couple of weeks. Thank
Everybody.
you.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Yeah,
Have a
nice
good
work.
night.
Bye.
Bye.